Welcome to Military Analytics. Groundbreaking days continue to be experienced in the Ukraine war, while the sudden long-range attacks of the Ukrainian army have added a different dimension to the war. The Russian front lines have begun to collapse. Dozens of Russian command posts, arsenals, and airfields have been targeted by explosions in the Russian-occupied Mariupol, Berdyansk, Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk. In recent days, especially with the United Kingdom's delivery of Storm Shadow short-range ballistic cruise missiles with a range of over 250 kilometers to the Ukrainian armed forces, the war has moved to a completely different dimension in favor of Ukraine. The inclusion of Mariupol in the Great Offensive Plan initiated by the Ukrainian armed forces on the Donetsk front lines has drawn all the attention to this region. Attacks are increasing in Mariupol, the land corridor between Crimea and Donbass, and tensions in the city are rising. This week, an incredible offensive operation took place in Mariupol with long-range cruise missiles. This attack was a critical step towards the liberation of Mariupol. Powerful explosions were heard in the suburbs of Mariupol and near the airport the other day after these explosions. It was reported that there were attacks in the airport area. Local residents posted a series of videos featuring the powerful explosions. The explosions were so strong that the sounds of the explosions made the city groan. After the explosions, fireballs rose into the sky. The flames were large enough to be seen from all over the city. Despite the darkness of the night, explosions shook the Mariupol region. Initial reports indicated that the Mariupol airport, where Russian troops were based, had been hit. According to available information, the missiles were launched from the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine and flew to the area of the old city airport of Mariupol. The huge missile salvo from 250 kilometers to the Mariupol airport, one of the main headquarters of the Russian army, made the Russian generals very nervous. In the shared video, it was understood that the explosions in Mariupol were quite violent. Therefore, it is thought that the Russian forces suffered a great deal of casualties as a result of the attacks. First of all, Petro Andriaschenko, advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, confirmed these attacks. Andriaschenko also shared a video of an explosion near the Nevsky residential complex recently built by Russian forces. In the video shared by the Mariupol City Council, huge black smoke clouds and the explosion behind residential buildings attracted a lot of attention. Petro Andriaschenko, advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, noted that the Russian air defense was not able to repel the attacks. A few hours before the explosion, Petro Andriaschenko reported that Russia had shifted helicopters from Berdyansk to Mariupol. Presumably, the Russian plane was moved to the airport area where the attack took place. Also, some sources claim that old barracks may become targets. However, at the moment, there are no details yet from the regional leadership. Although it is not specified with what weapons the attack was carried out, there is an official evidence that Storm Shadow cruise missiles could have been used because Mariupol is located beyond the 70-kilometer range of the HIMARS and M270 rocket launch systems that Ukraine received from the West. As previously reported, the UK has confirmed that it has supplied Storm Shadow air-launched cruise missiles to Ukraine. The declared operational range of this cruise missile is more than 250 kilometers. These explosions in Mariupol have also destroyed views of Russian domination in the city. So how is life in Mariupol, and why are the people there leaving the city and rebelling against Russia? Last year, Russian bombardments damaged or destroyed more than 90% of the city. In addition, Russian attacks cut off access to electricity, heating, fresh water, food, and medical supplies in Mariupol. This created a humanitarian disaster in Mariupol caused by Russian forces. Local officials say that more than 20,000 civilians have died in the city. These figures constitute huge damage to the city. Ukrainian officials explained that about 100,000 civilians remained in Mariupol, where before the war, about 430,000 people lived. About 330,000 civilians left the city. Mariupol harbor and train stations had become common escape points for civilians. Now the city hosts less than 100,000 residents, and their situation is critical. The remaining population density of the city consists of the Russian army, with about 50,000 soldiers. In other words, this city has been seriously affected socioeconomically and psychologically. On the other hand, Last month, Ukrainian missile and artillery units launched a massive attack on the port of Mariupol. Heavy artillery and machine gun explosions were heard in Mariupol harbor. In this operation carried out jointly by the Kiev missile and artillery units, the port city was exposed to heavy artillery fire. The violent sound of the attacks was also heard by the inhabitants of the city of Mariupol. Petro Andryaschenko, advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, announced the Ukrainian attempt to attack on Telegram. According to Andryaschenko, 6 months ago, this area was used by the Kadyrov for educational purposes. In addition, no official statement has yet been made about casualties and damage as a result of the attack. The smokescreen over the Mariupol port attack has not been lifted. Russian authorities refrained from giving detailed explanations about the incident. Also, in mid-March, at least 15 explosions took place in 10 days around Mariupol. Among the areas caught in the blast are 2 Russian ammunition depots at the airport in Mariupol, 2 fuel depots, Russian military bases, and the port area. So why is Mariupol still so important to the Russians? Why is Russia still afraid of losing the city? The Russians focused on Mariupol to create a corridor between Crimea and the east, and to paralyze the Ukrainian economy by blocking exports in the besieged Portuguese. As is known, Mariupol was largely devastated at the beginning of the war. However, it is still important for Russia because it is the largest city that Russia captured in 2022 and currently controls. And it is also on a very important logistics route. On the other hand, Mariupol is important for securing a corridor between Crimea and Donbass. Mariupol has been a strategically important port on the Sea of Azov, part of the Black Sea. It is the largest port for the Azov Sea region with its deep piers and is home to an important iron and steel factory. In normal times, Mariupol is Ukraine's major exports hub for steel, coal, and corn to customers in the Middle East and beyond. In other words, the Russian leader wants to put the Ukrainians in an economic bottleneck. Mariupol, on the other hand, was home to a Ukrainian military unit called the Azov Brigade. If Russia managed to capture a significant number of Azov Brigade fighters alive, it would likely expose these fighters to the Russian state-controlled media as part of an ongoing information war to discredit Ukraine and its government. But so far, this aim of Russia has not been successful because the Azov Regiment is still actively continuing the liberation struggle of Ukraine on the southern lines of Bakhmut. As a result, Mariupol has put up fierce resistance. But look at the price. The city was largely destroyed, in ruins. The places that Russia eventually bombed and bombarded, which will go down in history along with Grozny and Aleppo, have turned into rubble. In other words, the Russian armed forces, especially the Russian leader Vladimir Putin, almost stripped the city out of life with the invasion operation they planned. But the Ukrainians continue to resist no matter what. And as we mentioned, the recent attacks of the Ukrainian forces in Mariupol have already become a symbol for the liberation of this city. Now, many Ukrainians are more optimistic about the future. The majority of EU member states and those who think that Ukraine's freedom is justified, such as the USA, have started to work for the reconstruction of Ukraine. In this regard, the EU plans to use frozen Russian assets to rebuild Ukraine. If you remember, in the statement made by the presidency of the European Council of Sweden, it was stated that an EU working group would be established to use the frozen Russian assets for the reconstruction of Ukraine. In the statement, it was stated that the said working group will conduct legal, financial, economic, and political analysis on the possibilities of using frozen Russian assets in the reconstruction of Ukraine. And it was emphasized that the study also aimed to obtain a clearer picture of where the assets belonging to the Russian state are located and their total values. In short, the foundations for the reconstruction of Ukraine have already been laid. The main purpose now is seen as the end of this occupation of the Ukrainians and the re-establishment of peace. A series of explosions was heard in Donetsk, which was occupied by Russian forces. According to local sources, the main blow was directed at the area where the train station is located. It was noted that after the explosions, a fire broke out near the city's train station. Before the attack, Russian troops reportedly brought equipment to this area. The train station forms an important transportation network for the city. Any attack on the station could seriously disrupt communications and transportation. It is also known that Russia frequently uses train lines for ammunition supply. Damage to these lines could deeply shake Russian logistics. The main reason for the Ukrainian armed forces targeting train stations may be to disrupt Russian logistics. The occupation authorities claim that private residences were bombed and blamed the Ukrainian armed forces for the attack. On the other hand, it is thought that the attack was carried out by a stormy shadow. These missiles have a range of 250 kilometers and play an active role in eastern Ukraine, especially in Luhansk. Images of the explosion were shared by local residents on social media platforms. The huge black clouds rising into the sky were striking in the 10-second video footage. According to preliminary data, there were no casualties or injuries in the explosion. Parts of the train station were reportedly damaged as a result of the explosion. The exact location of the attack still remains unclear. There has been no official statement yet from the authorities on the matter. On the other hand, days after declaring victory in Bakhmut, the Wagner private military company announced in a statement that it had handed over the Ukrainian city to the Russian army. Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin suggested that Russia's regular soldiers could not expect any more help from the group. The 3-minute video posted on Telegram shows Mr. Prigozhin visiting what he said were Wagner positions in the city and telling his fighters to hand them over to the Russian troops. Prigozhin informed the Russian Ministry of Defense that the transfer of positions will continue until June 1st. Enlivened by his claim of victory in Bakhmut, Mr. Prigozhin became even more outspoken, warning the Russian elite that they would face the possibility of a popular uprising if they did not bring the country into a state of real war. Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Mali also confirmed the rotation. The forces of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic most likely entered the city to begin liquidation operations in recent weeks. Elements of the 31st Brigade of the Russian Air Force probably moved from the Svatov-Kremenna region to reinforce Bakhmut flanks. Also, Wagner's withdrawal could start a new phase for Bakhmut in the months-long struggle. It could test whether the Russian army can hold the hard-won ground against Ukrainian forces advancing on the outskirts of the city and preparing to launch a wider counteroffensive. As it is known, the Ukrainian forces had captured an area of 20 kilometers squared on the flanks of Bakhmut by May 16. The rotation out of the Wagner forces will likely continue in controlled stages to avoid collapse in the pockets around Bakhmut. Prigozhin will likely be used for further offensive operations in the Donbass after the Wagner forces rebuild. Despite the ongoing feud with the Russian Ministry of Defense for all internal conflicts, Wagner and the Russian army are also dependent on each other. Mr. Prigozhin has some of the best assault troops fighting on the Russian side, while the Ministry of Defense has a much larger arms supply. Although the Russian Ministry of Defense has a much larger arms supply than the Wagner paramilitary group, the Ukrainian war has also eroded Russian stockpiles. Former Russian commander Igor Girkin continued to criticize the country's operations in Ukraine, describing its forces as depleted and insufficiently stocked. The other day, Igor Girkin shared a long post analyzing the latest news from the battlefield. He claimed that due to the plight of the Russian forces, he expects a major attack from the Ukrainian forces soon. In his post, he explained in more detail how the Ukrainian forces would be met by Russian attacks from different fronts. For example, if they led an offensive in the Donetsk region and the Donbass, they would face badly fragmented and thin troops with the redeployment of reservists to Bakhmut. For these and other reasons, he rejected their efforts to take the city of Bakhmut, saying it was not worth the effort or money spent on it. After the Wagner group claimed it had taken full control of Bakhmut, Girkin wrote in another Telegram post that he wasn't thrilled to hear the news due to the losses and uncontrollability to take the city. The exact extent of Russia's losses in Bakhmut is currently unclear. Earlier this month, U.S. intelligence estimated that around 20,000 Russian soldiers had been killed and 80,000 injured in the past month, allegedly to take control of the city. In addition, new developments on the front lines raised an important question. So, is Ukraine's Great Spring counteroffensive taking place? Commentary on the Ukraine war sounds bipolar. Russia is launching missiles en masse to destroy the positions in Ukraine. Russia is staggering and about to explode. And then there is the upcoming Ukrainian spring counterattack. For weeks, we have been told that an attack is imminent. A few thoughts come to mind. Look at the question through the lens of surprise. Surprise is a war principle. but the grades of the strategic cannon differ on its effectiveness. According to the Chinese warrior writer Sun Tzu, deception and surprise are the essence of effective and efficient warfare. They displace an enemy's efforts, making it a simple matter for the field general who has a clever sense of timing to attack. They break the enemy's back like a hawk, knocking down its prey. Prussian sage Karl von Clausewitz is less optimistic about such indirect measures than his Asian foresight. Strategic surprise is desirable but unrealistic in modern warfare. In contrast, he finds efforts to create a tactical surprise valuable but finds them indecisive. Clausewitz concludes that such games are rarely extraordinarily successful to the extent that he has the classics in mind. Ukrainian political and military chiefs appear Clausewitzian rather than submissive to Sun Tzu. On the other hand, the tactical surprise continues in the Ukrainian panoply. Three basic options emerge. First, the Ukrainian army could fake a place or two before launching a general offensive along the entire war front in hopes of completely crushing the Russian lines. It seems doubtful that the Russian army and its aides will attempt an all-out frontal attack. Second, the Ukrainian army can attempt multiple simultaneous attacks along the line. Such an approach would be inherently deceptive. The rationale for dispersing the effort between simultaneous attacks rather than building a massive counterforce is to throw the Russian defenders into the horns of a dilemma. Multiple strikes would eliminate the option of Russian commanders to move forces along domestic lines to meet the attacks one by one, as it could have been the uncoordinated efforts of Ukraine. Third, Ukrainian commanders can concentrate strength in one spot along the line, masking troop movements to hide where the blow will land. Eventually, the problem of a spring attack comes down to Clausewitz's dynamics. Clausewitz charted the typical rhythm of one competitor's attack on the other. In the beginning, he is aggressive, taking the initiative, taking advantage of surprise as much as he can. Etc. will take advantage of a battlefield. However, this advantage shrinks as the attacker dives deeper into the enemy's own field. According to Clausewitz, at some point, the balance of power reaches a transition point beyond which the balance is reversed. The attacker no longer falls short in combat power when operating deep within the defender's territory. The military base captured in the Kharkiv region was successfully destroyed by the Ukrainian army with HIMARS missiles. Russian President Vladimir Putin's plan of aggression has been neutralized, and billions of dollars in losses have been incurred. The whole world, hoping for an end to the war between Russia and Ukraine, is unfortunately witnessing an escalation of violence. The Ukrainian army has completely thwarted the Russian army's operational plans by using HIMARS missiles in the city of Izium. As the fighting on the Bakhmut front continues, the Russian army has still not managed to break through the defense line formed by Ukrainian forces. The Russian army seized areas near the city of Bakhmut, took control of the Solidar region, and pushed Ukrainian forces back. Wagner mercenaries, backed by Yevgeny Prigozhin, captured the city of Salvador and brought it under Russian control. The Ukrainian army retreated to Bakhmut, where it established a 15-kilometer defensive line. Russian forces continued their offensive in the hope of capturing the city of Bakhmut, but they were unable to enter the city thanks to the determined resistance of the Ukrainian army. Russian commanders then decided to launch airstrikes to weaken the Ukrainian troops stationed in Bakhmut. Two Russian Su-25 fighter jets mobilized from Kharkiv and started moving towards the Bakhmut front. The Russian warplanes fired two missiles at the area where the Ukrainian 52nd Artillery Unit was located on the Bakhmut front. However, due to the distance, the missiles did not hit the Ukrainian troops. Russian pilots fully entered the Bakhmut airspace to fire more effectively, unaware of the Patriot air defense systems deployed behind the front line. As soon as the Russian warplanes entered Bakhmut airspace, they were targeted by activated Patriot missiles, which fired missiles towards the Russian aircraft. After tracking the Russian fighter jets for a short period of time, the Patriot missiles reached their target and managed to destroy the Su-25 fighter jets. The Russian warplanes were destroyed in the air, preventing a second attack on Bakhmut. When Russia failed to capture the city of Bakhmut through ground operations, it began to increase its airstrikes. To prevent these attacks, the Ukrainian army decided to organize an operation on the airbase in Kharkiv, where Russian warplanes were mobilized. This military airbase, which previously belonged to the Ukrainian Air Force, came under the control of the Russian army after the invading Russian forces seized Kharkiv. Every day, Russian forces launched dozens of warplanes from this airbase and carried out airstrikes on certain regions of Ukraine. Ukrainian authorities decided that this airbase must be destroyed and contacted Ukrainian commanders in Izium. Izium is a town that was liberated from the Russian occupying forces in recent months and is an area where the Ukrainian army has concentrated its troops. Ukrainian forces have deployed HIMARS missiles, tanks, armored vehicles, and troops to Izium to ensure the security of the Donetsk region. The Ukrainian army hopes that with the HIMARS missiles in Izium, they will be able to destroy the Russian military airbase in Kharkiv. The secret information obtained as a result of intensive cooperation between Ukrainian and British intelligence services included the exact coordinates of the Russian airbase in Kharkiv and detailed images of the warplanes and helicopters based at the airbase. This important intelligence information was quickly transmitted to Ukrainian commanders in the city of Izium, enabling the launch of a strategic operation. Ukrainian soldiers entered target coordinates into the HIMARS missile system and fired 8 missiles. These deadly missiles traveled silently through the sky on their way to Kharkiv. However, an advanced Pantsir 1 missile defense system in the airbase's defenses detected the HIMARS missiles and quickly activated with ruthless determination. The Pantsir 1 successfully destroyed 3 HIMARS missiles, but the remaining 5 HIMARS missiles continued on their way to their target. Surprisingly, these missiles accurately hit Russian fighter jets and helicopters at the airbase. The missiles hit Su-27 fighter jets and K-52 helicopters accompanied by terrifying explosions. Successive explosions echoed throughout the airbase, and Russian forces desperately tried to maneuver the airbase, which was in utter disarray. However, a HIMARS missile delivered a precise hit on a key airstrip at the airbase. A huge hole in the runway prevented Russian planes from taking off and landing effectively. Successive explosions and aircraft wreckage threw the airbase into chaos. While Russian forces suffered the loss of both strategic aircraft and helicopters, this successful operation demonstrated that Ukraine has a tight intelligence network and effective military planning. The destruction of Russia's airbase demonstrated the strength and determination of the Ukrainian army and proved its increased defensive capabilities. It was an important milestone, demonstrating that Ukraine's resistance is strengthening and mobilizing effectively to repel attacks. The U.S. deployment of Patriot and HIMARS missiles to the Ukrainian military has greatly increased Ukraine's air operations against Russian forces. Russia launched airstrikes in many areas of Ukrainian territory, targeting residential areas, particularly Kiev, and destroying infrastructure facilities. As a result of these attacks, Ukrainian citizens were deprived of basic needs such as electricity and water for days. However, after the Ukrainian army began to use HIMARS missiles, it began to respond effectively against Russian forces. Once the HIMARS missiles were in the hands of the Ukrainian military, a major operation was first launched against a Russian airbase on the Crimean Peninsula using HIMARS missiles. Ukrainian forces precisely targeted the airbase, severely weakening Russia's military presence. This operation demonstrated Ukraine's strength and defense capability and resolve against Russia with the use of HIMARS missiles. The Ukrainian military is able to conduct more effective airstrikes against Russian forces and strengthen its defensive posture. These missile systems acquired by Ukraine with U.S. support provide a significant advantage in the fight against Russian forces. The Ukrainian army's operations have caused major damage to strategic locations such as Russia's airbase on the Crimean Peninsula and an ammunition depot in the city of Belgorod. As a result of the explosions at the airbase in Crimea, 4 Russian Su-25 fighter jets were destroyed, and Russia suffered billions of dollars in losses. The next operation targeted by the Ukrainian army was the Russian city of Belgorod. Using HIMARS missiles, the Ukrainian army effectively destroyed the Russian ammunition depot in Belgorod. This operation demonstrated Ukraine's ability to target its military presence against Russia and exert a strong influence at strategic points. The recent fires and explosions within Russia's borders have caused serious anxiety among the Russian public. Although Putin explains these incidents as accidents, the Russian people do not trust what he says, especially the explosion of a natural gas pipeline in a region close to Moscow that scares the Russian people. These incidents also show Russia's internal security problems. The incessant fires and explosions threaten the stability and security within Russia. This situation creates anxiety and unease among the Russian people and raises questions about Putin's leadership. Thank you for watching us.